Kia ora, Mr Speaker. I ngā mana i ngā reo rangatira mā tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I'd like to take this opportunity, Mr Speaker, to firstly congratulate you on your re-selection as a Speaker in this House of Parliament. I find that you have always been very fair, and I look forward to working with you and your colleagues, the Honourable David Carter, Chester Burrows, and I want to acknowledge that this is a new role for him, and also my colleague, the Honourable Trevor Mallard. I would also like to congratulate all members across the House, but particularly new members. This is an opportunity that you can't pay for. It's an opportunity that you earn through hard work and connection with your communities, those of you who are elected MPs. But also I want to take the opportunity to congratulate all the political parties on what was a pretty intense campaign. The National Party have worked hard and have secured a mandate, and I respect that the people of New Zealand have spoken, and I wish you all very well in the role in terms of governing our country. But I also want to acknowledge all the new ministers, all the new select committee chairs, because we want to be constructive in terms of the work that this House does. I would also like to acknowledge specifically the Honourable Tūroro Flavel in his role as Minister of Māori Affairs and a new tikanga that he established, which was to have a karakia on Monday morning with Te Atiawa in Mātangireia, and it was a privilege to actually be part of what is a new tikanga. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the House for their agreement for my colleague Sua Williams-Seal to, in addition to taking the oath in English, to take the oath in his heritage language. Because whether or not we realise it, we have changed and created a tikanga that will enable in the future, I hope, any New Zealander who has a heritage language to be able to take the oath in either Māori or English, and also in their heritage language. So I'm really proud of what this House has managed to achieve already. I want to focus on what the government's agenda is within the next 3 years and its relevance to my electorate of Manurewa. I want to thank the people of Manurewa for empowering me with the responsibility to be their spokesperson, and in doing so I want to acknowledge all the other people who put their hands up to be the spokesperson for Manurewa. I'm incredibly privileged to be in this position, and so for me, when I look at the agenda that the government has set out for the country, of course I'm going to think about what it means for the people in my electorate. One of the policies that the government has signalled that it will prioritise is extending flexible working arrangements. And I guess as a member of the Service and Food Workers Union, a proud member of the Service and Food Workers Union that represents the lowest paid people in our country, I obviously want to understand what the implications for flexible working arrangements may mean. And so for me, if flexible working arrangements means decreasing the power of the unions, and obviously unions collaborate with workers to make sure that the conditions of workers enables them to get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. And what does that pay do? It pays for their power, it pays for their rent, hopefully it pays for their mortgages, some of them. But what it is, it enables people to live independent lives. And so when we look at equality of opportunity, obviously the equality of opportunity doesn't happen within a vacuum. It happens within a context. So what I'm hoping is that those flexible working arrangements are going to enable working New Zealanders to be able to put a roof over their head, food on the table, and enable their children to have a good quality of life, whether it be in sports or the arts or whatever. What I don't want to see in terms of the consequences of the legislation that this government has prioritised is an erosion of the value of wages. Because if we see an erosion of the value of wages, what does it mean in electorates like mine? Actually, it means people living in cars, people living in tents, people living on the streets, people living in circumstances where 18 people in a 2- and 3-bedroom home has actually become normal. It means children living in garages. And that context for the people of my electorate in Manurewa is something that I'm incredibly focused on. because I can't do my job unless the government does its job, and I'm sure the government hasn't got a deliberate intention of putting families, children on the streets, living in cars, living in garages. The other thing I don't want to see through the extension of flexible working arrangements is an expansion of the low-paid service sector. So we want to see people being paid enough and not have to work 60, 70, 80, 90-hour weeks to be able to live the New Zealand dream, which actually is about working hard and then having a quality of life that means you can play sport, you can take your kids to the beach. You know, you don't have to work 6, 7 days a week. And the other thing I don't want to see is that it increases temporary and part-time employment. Because again, what does that erode? It erodes the ability of families and parents to provide the basics for their children. My focus on homelessness is timely because the Parliamentary Library Research Unit put out a paper in July, and it's titled Homelessness in New Zealand. And the reality of homelessness in New Zealand, and I'm going to outline who are the people who are homeless in New Zealand. So the University of Otago did some research, and basically people who are homeless in New Zealand are Pacific, or new migrants, Pacific or North Asian. They are, more than half of them are people younger than 25 years. Half of them are children under the age of 15 years, and then most of them are Māori and Pacific. The relevance of these statistics to my electorate are because I have 32% Pacific, I am 28% Māori, I'm 23.4% Indian. And so for me, living in an electorate where I have high concentrations of specific ethnic groups who don't own their own homes, actually the state or social housing providers or landlords who are going to provide accommodation to my tenants or to my constituents is incredibly important. Home ownership rates now in New Zealand are less than 50%. But if you're Māori, they're 28%, and if you're Pacific, they're 18.5%. So one of the concerns I have, and this is another priority for this government, is to sell 22,000 state houses. We currently have 68,000 state houses, and the mandate of Housing New Zealand is to provide rental housing for those who need it most. And I guess when I look at the definition of those who need it most, I would have thought that includes people living in cars, people living in tents, people living on the streets, people living in 2- and 3-bedroom houses where there are 3, 4, 5 families living together in crowded conditions. And so when I look at my electorate, we have houses sitting empty at the moment. So what Ian Lees Galloway is experiencing in Palmerston North, what Kamau Sepuloni is experiencing in Kelston, what Megan Woods is experiencing in Wigram, and I would contend quite a few other electorate MPs across this House are experiencing, are people who are in need of what I would say is the basic necessity of life, to be able to go to work, for kids to be able to go to school, for our children actually to have the aspiration and the dreams that we all want them to have. And so when I look at a priority of selling 22,000 state houses within a context of under-provision, it makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. And so what I want to call this government to account for is that there will be some houses that are in some places where actually selling the house and using that money more effectively makes sense. But I call for a moratorium on the selling of state houses in areas like Manurewa, in areas like South Auckland, in areas like Christchurch, in areas like West Auckland, where we have people who are living in cars, living on the streets, have nowhere to live. And so if the government is true to what it said in terms of addressing child poverty, one of the things I would like them to do is to tell us, tell New Zealand, where these 22,000 houses are, and to guarantee that in areas where we don't have the provision, that they will not sell them. And I think that if this government wants to work constructively and meet the needs of New Zealanders, they would do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Simon Bridges.
It's a great privilege, an unalloyed privilege, to be speaking in this, the 51st Parliament in New Zealand's history, and to be returned as the MP for Tauranga.